Hello and welcome to V Knowledge on Cinema. I'm Victor Omoayo, and today's film is No Country for Old Men, starring Josh Brolin, Javier Bardem, Tommy Lee Jones, Kelly MacDonald, and Woody Harrelson. Written and directed by the Coen brothers, Joel Coen and Ethan Coen, and released in 2007. No Country for Old Men is a film that works on numerous levels. For starters, it is a jarring and compelling thriller, but more than that, the film is an existential examination of fate, morality, and generational despair, with a fair amount of bullets and blood thrown in for good measure. Based on Cormac McCarthy's acclaimed novel of the same name, the film is driven by three central characters. Josh Brolin is Llewellyn Moss, a man who stumbles across a case filled with $2 million in cash. He is subsequently hunted by Javier Bardem's mysterious contract killer, Anton Chigurh. Meanwhile, Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, played by Tommy Lee Jones, pursues the case while trying to make sense of the violent circumstances that surround it all. The Coen brothers deliver a film that is tailor-made for analysis, and No Country for Old Men is a film that I've been eager to cover for some time now. Much has been pondered about the film's meaning, its themes, and especially its ending, of which there are many strong opinions of. Now, this video essay will be spoiler-heavy, so if you're curious about the film, I recommend you should check it out first. But once again, if spoilers don't faze you, then let us take a walk through this uncompromising and unsettling country. The film opens with beautiful, wide shots of the vast and vacant West Texas countryside, and we hear some voiceover narration by Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, who speaks about his history as a third-generation lawman, continuing the work of his father and grandfather. He details a crime where a guy killed a 14-year-old girl just because he'd been planning to kill someone, anyone, for a long time. Ed doesn't know what to make of such remorselessness, such a needless loss of life. He goes on to reference the upcoming events in the film, saying, quote, "The crime you see now, it's hard to even take its measure. I don't want to push my chips forward and go out and meet something I don't understand. A man would have to put his soul at hazard. He'd have to say, okay, I'll be part of this world." Ed's opening monologue is significant because it sets the tone for the rest of the film, and it encapsulates his own trepidation of where he thinks the world he knew all his life is headed. More on this later. After his remarks, we're immediately introduced to the film's chief antagonist, the sociopathic Anton Chigurh, who is arrested and brought to a remote police station. As the officer calls his superiors to inform them of the arrest he just made, Anton strangles the poor young cop to death, cutting deep into his throat with the handcuffs bound to his wrists. What makes this scene even more disturbing is that Anton seems to derive some perverse pleasure from this grisly killing, as the last shot displays his satisfaction. Anton quickly makes his escape from the station and drives off with the officer's police car. He pulls over a random motorist, an elderly man who he kills with one of his two rather unusual weapons of choice, a captive bolt pistol used to lethally incapacitate cattle. Following this shocking moment, we're introduced to the third major player of this tale, Llewellyn Moss, an average Joe hunting pronghorn in the open plains. Most curiously, in the prior scene, Anton tells the unwitting old man to hold still before punching a hole in his forehead. While Llewellyn focuses on one of the pronghorn's heads with the scope of his rifle, he mutters, "Hold still," before pulling the trigger. This parallel is the film's subtle way of bridging the two characters, as they are both hunters in their own fashions. This also serves as an understated foreshadowing of their ultimate fates to come, as Anton kills his target, but Llewellyn misses his. Eventually, Llewellyn stumbles upon a nasty crime scene, consisting of dead drug dealers, bullet-riddled pickup trucks, dead canines, and a lone dying man begging for a drink of water. Across the plains from this display of death lies the satchel filled with $2 million that he discovers and takes home. Now, this could have been the end of Llewellyn's story, an ordinary guy who got lucky and rode off into the sunset with his wife in tow, Carla Jean. But his conscience gets the better of his judgment as he later returns to the same crime scene to give the now deceased man the water he needed. Events quickly deteriorate into life-threatening desperation, and even Llewellyn by his own admission quips that what he got himself into is dumber than all hell. As the film's main villain, Anton Chigurh is frightening for several reasons. First, his background is totally unknown. His age, where he's from, what led him to his line of work, are all left unanswered. The lack of such information suits him well, as others who are aware of his handiwork perceive him as a literal Grim Reaper, more of a set of lawless ideals made flesh and bone, and less of an actual person. There is one shot that expresses this notion, where he arrives at Llewellyn's home. His target has been long gone. Anton sits in front of Llewellyn's television, his silhouette reflecting off the blank screen. In this respect, Anton is the very blueprint of Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight, the human embodiment of chaos and terror. Like his clown-faced counterpart, Anton is immune to bargain making and pleas for reason. He just wants to set the world on fire and watch it smolder. His very appearance also intrigues and inspires dread. He's clad in all-black attire and sports a unique Prince Valiant hairstyle. Even the captive bolt pistol he hauls around is a dark expression of his view of others. It's perhaps his understated attempt at humor. The lowly people he encounters throughout the film in his eyes are nothing but mere cattle, meek little pieces of prey that need to be put to pasture. He toys with his victims with a nerve-wracking coin toss, proclaiming that the outcome is not his responsibility, but that it is up to chance to decide. One of the film's standout scenes is where Anton antagonizes a hapless store owner when the elderly man tries to make small talk with him. Anton's arrogance radiates through his curt, intimidating glare and mocking of the man's southern accent, and he even derides him for marrying into a simple lifestyle. Through their dialogue, Anton rationalizes that the store owner is unworthy of living and is practically salivating at the thought of turning him into a blood spatter. That is until the old man correctly calls heads on the coin and Anton leaves the store, telling the man not to put away his new lucky quarter. As for Llewellyn, I think back to Ed's opening monologue in which he expresses his worries about confronting a danger of which he has no understanding. Ed's fears gives voice to the very title of the film. In the modern era in which he lives, the film is set in the year 1980, what he perceives to be the tried and true traditional values of himself and his forebears, such as loyalty, respect, honor, and the like, are all but passé in the new, destructive world that he inhabits. For instance, Llewellyn's sole act of mercy, which was bringing the bottle of water back to the dying man at the crime scene, only serves to thrust him into a downward spiral of doom of which he cannot escape from. Although he successfully outwits Anton at the motel where he stays, the killer soon catches up to him by homing in on the hidden transponder in the satchel full of money, which Llewellyn discovers far too late when he winds up in a tense cat-and-mouse shootout with Anton at another hotel near the US-Mexican border. Llewellyn, perhaps owing to his experience as a Vietnam War veteran, barely makes it out of this ordeal alive. After hiding the money and crossing the border, he passes out and later awakes to some singing by a mariachi band. Translated to English, they accurately summarize his predicament by singing, "You wanted to fly without wings. You wanted to touch the sky. You wanted too much wealth. You wanted to play with fire." There is one moment in the film when another character emerges in the mix, a bounty hunter named Carson Wells, played by Woody Harrelson, who offers protection for Llewellyn in exchange for the $2 million. Carson does not have the opportunity to make good on his offer, however, as he's caught off guard by Anton and is killed in his hotel room. Just before he pulls the trigger, Anton asks Carson, "If the rule you follow brought you to this, of what use was the rule?" This is a question that primarily applies to Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, the old lawman who is just on the verge of retirement when Anton arrives in town. As a police officer, Ed's rule is to protect and serve the public, putting a stop to dangers whenever and wherever they arise. However, decades of law enforcement have left Ed world-weary and weighed down with anxiety. In his view, the rule he has followed all his life has led him into a more confusing, more cynical, and more hostile world that even his best efforts and lifelong experiences can no longer address effectively. Anton Chigurh is a far different brand of criminal than he has known, as his murders seem to have no rhyme or reason to them. All Ed feels at this point in his life is a depressing helplessness, a feeling of being overmatched, as he puts it. The character of Ed is that of a man who probably would feel more at home in a bygone era, perhaps in the American Old West. There is one scene where he arrives to the beginning crime scene with a fellow deputy on horseback, even though they could have easily just drove there. When he arrives at Llewellyn's vacant home, just missing Anton, he sits in front of the television and looks at his own silhouette on the blank screen. This shot expresses just how out of place he feels within the present-day times he lives in, and it reaffirms his feelings that there truly is no longer a country for old men and their so-called antiquated values of honor and goodness. Death comes so easily and so intensely in No Country for Old Men that Ed is unable to save Llewellyn from the monstrous tide of destruction, as shown in the scene where Ed witnesses the gang of drug dealers speeding away from a motel where Llewellyn is staying. When Ed marches to the doorway, he sees Llewellyn's dead body sprawled on the floor. Remorse sets in, as Ed's failure to uphold his promise to Carla Jean to save her husband hangs over his head. It is this failure that compels Ed to return to the murder scene. As he cautiously steps toward the late Llewellyn's motel room, we see Anton hiding in the shadows, the light of the outside beaming in through the open lock he punched a hole in earlier with his cattle gun. His eyes wide with eagerness to rack up his body count with one more corpse, Anton readies his shotgun, and Ed, drawing his pistol, slowly opens the door and moves inside. However, Anton is nowhere to be found. Watching this scene several times, it is still unclear whether or not Anton was actually there at that very moment, or if Ed somehow imagined him to be on the other side of the door. Either way, the two men never confront each other, and once again, Ed has narrowly missed the culprit. In the context of this scene, Ed's opening monologue is, in my view, another representation of his own admitted inability to oppose the random, unstoppable brand of violence dispensed by Anton and his ilk. Perhaps in Ed's estimation, it takes an equally dangerous individual, along with an equally broad and malleable definition of morality, to effect any meaningful impact on such new and unique threats. Like Ed said, one would have to put his soul at hazard, for traditional notions of good and evil are too narrow. One of the film's last scenes sees Llewellyn's now widowed wife, Carla Jean, arrive home only to find Anton waiting for her in her bedroom. Carla Jean instantly realizes what is in store for her, and Anton gives her a chance to survive with another coin toss. Dismayed, she refuses to play Anton's twisted game, correctly telling him that he alone is making the choice to murder and not out of some BS sense of karma or some such. We don't see Anton disposing of Carla Jean, though when he emerges from her home, it is obvious what just transpired. However, he does not go away unscathed, for in a showing of what could be a bit of poetic justice, Anton suffers severe injuries when his car is suddenly sideswiped by another vehicle. Staggering out of the wrecked car with a bloodied eye and a broken bone protruding from his forearm, Anton parallels Llewellyn's actions from the aftermath of their gun battle when he pays one of the neighborhood boys for the shirt off his back just before limping away from the accident. His last words to the boys are, "You didn't see me." This final scene with Anton confirms Carla Jean's implied perceptions of the man, for he is just as vulnerable to the random, unforeseen waves of chaos as any other human. Anton is not a dispenser of karmic retribution, nor an arbiter of chance and fate, for such forces of nature can easily touch him. Anton's last remarks are a way for him to shield his wounded ego from the truth about himself. Finally, we come to the much talked about ending of the film. It ends on a somber note when Ed tells his wife about two dreams he had. In the first dream, his father gives him some money, which he loses. This references the $2 million MacGuffin that propelled the actions of the other characters. The second dream sees him and his dad riding on horseback through the mountains. His father rides ahead of him and carries a horn filled with fire, ready to set up camp somewhere in the cold, dark lands. Ed says that wherever his father set the fire, he knew that they would reunite. Ed's dream is his own subconscious way of making sense of the grisly events that unfolded throughout the film, and I interpret it as his own personal hope that the old ways of his and his own parents' generations, symbolized by the fire and the horn, will continue to be preserved and carried on throughout future ones. Even in the midst of such morally desolate times, Ed has to hope that there will continue to be a country, a refuge for old notions of virtue and bravery to face ever-emerging hazards. No Country for Old Men is an incredible addition to the Coen brothers' catalog and is certainly my favorite film by the duo. It's certainly a film that really digs a crawl space into your memory, and it's a film that I encourage you to see and just mull over for a day or two. And once again, thank you for watching. I'm Victor Omoayo, and you can find more video essay goodness on my V Knowledge channel.